Father Pat, time out.
Time out, what?
Somebody hit somebody!
Welcome back. So in this episode, I'm going to be talking about the importance of talking to people you don't agree with. And, I think it's something that, a lot of us want to talk to people we do agree with, and understandably so, because, we don't want confrontation. We want our point validated. We want to feel that sense of community, and those are all good things. But I do think there's an importance to talking to people you don't agree with. And so I'm going to give you some of the reasons why. So the first reason I talk about is, well, you might be wrong. You also might be right. But again, I think that both of those subjects are served by talking to people you don't agree with, because if you're talking to someone you don't agree with, like I said, and they point something out that you didn't realize, it's important to constantly educate ourselves. It's important to not just live in a bubble where the only information we're getting is information that we've already agreed upon. And so again, it's important to be able to be flexible, because if you look at the concept of not being exposed to things you don't agree with, well, that would derail so much progress we've had throughout humanity. There were thousands of years where every population thought that the world was flat. And obviously, as we know that today, it's not true in the least. And so again, that's information that we would not have received, and we would have lived in fear of falling off the edge of the earth or whatever, if we hadn't expanded our minds on that concept. And same thing goes with civil rights, with that concept in the country where we freed the slaves. If we had to have the same mindset as predecessors who did not think that certain people of certain colors had value or didn't, again, we would not have progressed to the point we are today. And so the importance of talking to people you don't agree with is simply to expand your mind and understanding. On the same hand, too, for myself, a lot of reasons why I like talking to people I don't agree with is it, in many ways, it also validates when you are right. When you hear the opposition, you hear their argument or lack of argument. My wonderful children in the background screaming and adding to the conversation. Then again, too, you can get validation in your point if you hear opposition and they're speaking foolishness, or if they're speaking untruth. I don't think that's a word. I would say lies, because again, and that's a distinction people need to make, is there's a difference between someone lying and someone saying something that's not true. Someone's lying. The nature of lying is not just saying something that's not true, but it's knowing that it's not true. That is a lie. But to simply say something that isn't true is to be misinformed, or just not have an expansion of education. But someone shouldn't be ashamed or attacked simply because they haven't heard the whole story. But again, that's one of the importance of reasons of why of talking to people that you don't agree with, is that so you can have a better understanding of what opposition is and on your position. And many times, like I said, with myself, is I hear opposition, and I'm like, and that's why I believe what I believe. But again, it's not simply to have that response. Like I said, it's important to listen to the consistency and not just be thinking about what you're going to say next. A lot of times when I see people having quote unquote debates or disagreements or discussions, a lot of times, I see people who aren't even listening to and again, I don't like using that word, not listening, because I've had people, or again, I've witnessed people say that you're not listening, and they conflate listening with agreeing, and that's not what listening is. But it's hearing the compelling story. It's hearing the other side. It's speaking your piece and then letting the other side speak. So I get that. But again, too, there's a lot of times when I'm talking to people and I'm hearing their argument of why something is okay or isn't okay, or why certain actions or whatever the discussion is. But a lot of times that actually reassures me of my beliefs, because if you simply are looking at a stance, and you obviously, most people just look at their stance and to support their point of view. And so that's the thing, is that when I hear the opposition and the opposition is lacking.
A week later, right out of the blue, she sends me a John Deere letter. She give you any reason? Yeah, I called her up. She gave me a bunch of crap about me not listening to her enough or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention.
Or completely bunk. Yes, it just reassures me that I'm on the right path. But again, another point would be to better understand the points of view of the people you're talking to. Because again, I feel like a lot of the times when we have these conversations or don't have conversations because of this, when you hear certain statements like Black Lives Matter or All Lives Matter or Blue Lives Matter or the national anthem, or whatever these controversial conversations are, a lot of times when you hear support for one of these abbreviations, we form a complete picture of what the person is who's saying it, even though they haven't really said anything yet. They haven't said why they believe what they believe. They haven't said in what aspect they believe. And again, so that's the thing that it's so important to talk to people we don't agree with, is to become more educated on the opposition, on the people you're dealing with. Because for myself, when I've simply formed ideas and positions based on a principle, the fact that you're against what I'm for, a lot of times it is upsetting. It is, you take it personal that the person is not supporting your side. You take it personal, and you form these ideas of why they could possibly feel that way. Well, because they're pure evil. A lot of times that's not the case. A lot of times it's because of their own perspective of life. A lot of times it's because of their own personal pain that has directed them to have this compelling argument, this compelling position on a certain subject. And so for myself, I find a lot more peace with people I don't necessarily agree with when I realize why they believe what they believe, and not just form why they believe what they believe based on my perspective of what that means. And so again, that's the thing, is you become more educated on people you don't agree with. And I think it's important to have that understanding, because if you think that the people that are in the opposition of you are these these demons, these horrible human beings, it's going to be a pretty miserable existence to think that anybody who doesn't agree with you is essentially the devil. But again, I move on to the next point of, again, those misconceptions. Like I said, as I've had people make statements, and again, they fill in the picture of what that means, of what you are as a person and what you support. If you say, Black Lives Matter, in someone's mind, they might think, well, that means you're in approval of rioting and looting and attacking and murdering innocent people in the name of, and it's like, no, a lot of people don't agree with that. And a lot of the leaders of Black Lives Matter factions of groups throughout the country are actually stepping away from the organization because of that conflation of evil acts, where they're saying that's not what we're about. We're not about these attacks, these riots, these looting. And so it's just something I can't be a part of, because of now it's being changed to what it means. There's some of the leaders have straight up said they're being hijacked. Their cause is being hijacked, and it's being used maliciously for the intent of others. But again, that's why it's so important to talk to people, because I think we would get along with so many different people if we just understood their individual intent and what they meant by those statements, and what they meant by disagreeing with us on certain subjects. If we realized their motivations and what they mean, it'd be so much more peaceful. I think so much more of us would get along and realize that a lot of us agree with so many different discussions. It's just a matter of how we approach the discussion. I think that's something that's sadly ironic, is that there's so many of us who agree with problems. We just don't necessarily agree with the solution to the problem. But we all identify that these acts are evil or that need to be stopped. We just don't agree with the resolution, and that's not something that should divide us. I mean, we can not, it's that especially if we agree that there's something that's a problem, we just don't agree with the resolution. That's definitely a point where we need to agree to disagree. Because again, if we're all identifying that something is a true issue and something needs to be fixed, that's not opposition. That's just disagreement. If I say most people in most families, in most relationships, will disagree with certain things at certain points. That doesn't mean that they're mortal enemies. It's just human nature for us to disagree with certain things, because we're all different. We all come from different backgrounds, and we've all seen different solutions that have worked and haven't worked. And so again, that's the thing, is that a lot of times we're watching things and watching actions and watching statements through our own filter of what we've experienced and truths that are true in our lives. And that's the thing that I've learned in life, is that there are many things that are true. There are many, you can have one problem, have two different solutions that are in complete opposition that are effective. But again, they very well could be effective because of certain elements within those problems, because of the people in those issues. You can't just look at a situation and say, we're having a domestic dispute, or we're having a political argument, and say, well, this has worked last time, so it's immediately going to work again. That was a lesson I learned with my children. Just because my process or my discipline or my reaction to certain behavior worked with one child does not mean it will work with another. That was a big opening peaceful, because again, when my wife and I had our second child, it was extremely frustrating using procedures, using steps that worked very effectively with our first son, with our second that weren't working, because I felt like I've already been here, I know this works. And so when it didn't work, it was frustrating. But that was one thing that really gave me peace, was when I realized just because it worked with one kid does not mean it will work with another. I need to figure out what's going to resolve this issue, what's going to motivate this child. And so again, two exact same things. They're both sons, both my wife and I's children. And so all the elements were consistent, and yet there was different resolution worked. And so again, this attitude like somehow one side is 100% right and one side is 100% wrong. Both sides can be legitimately right, and both sides can be legitimately wrong. And so that's why, again, it's important to talk to people you don't agree with. Get to the final point. That's the thing, is that the sad truth is that we are never all going to agree on certain subjects. We're never going to be all sitting around a campfire singing Kumbaya. It's just the fact of the matter is, if you look at history, the past and the present, and I'm sure the future will have this, is that you can look at history and find people who almost identically agree to things that had essentially the same premise of beliefs, and yet they disputed, even to the point where they killed each other. If you look back at, and I can't remember what years it was, but there was many, many years where the Catholic Church and the Protestants murdered each other. And yet in today's world, a lot of people would just see them as almost the same religion. They all believe in God, they all believe in Jesus, they all believe in the Bible and so forth. They practice it differently. But again, they were mortal enemies. Like I said, they would mass murder each other because of their disagreements. And so the fact that we have so many different religions, so many different backgrounds, and we're shocked that we're all at each other's throats, that we don't agree, and we have this mentality like somehow, unless I live in a world where everyone agrees with me, I'm going to be miserable. I can't live in this. And so I'm like I'm saying, is even to the point where you could almost identically agree with something, there are going to be disputes. You can look at politics. You can look at the different colors of people, where it's not like one demographic of people 100% is on the same page with all these resolutions, with all these politicians. And so that in of itself should tell us that we're all going to naturally disagree. It's just going to be a part of existence. And so if you live in a world where you can't be happy, you can't be at peace unless everyone agrees with you, then you're inevitably going to be miserable. It's not a matter of if, it's not a matter of how long. You will in fact be miserable if you live life based on the fact that you can't live in a world where you disagree with somebody. It just won't work. But again, I want to talk about these conversations and talk about these issues not as a means of instigating anything. I want to be a mediator. I want to talk about the reality that if you're on either side of these issues, if you're, because again, I see this lack of a desire of talking and communicating with people from both sides of arguments plenty of times. And so again, I want people to self-reflect and see how they can individually benefit themselves, and by doing so, by individually growing, you're going to inevitably help the community. You're going to be part of that solution. Because I think the biggest part of the solution of all these problems is an ability to talk and communicate. Because if we don't talk and we don't communicate, then we're going to alienate ourselves. That's a lack of communication is the development of resentment. And if you resent somebody, you're certainly not going to want to become a part of them. You're not going to want them in your community. You're just going to create this loathing of disdain where you want them removed. And so again, it's important to make these distinctions and realize why we're at such great odds with each other, why we have such great division, rather than simply say, well, it's their fault. That doesn't solve anything. Again, it is important to identify the source of the problem, but generally speaking, if you look at the real source of the problem is a lack of communication and ability to truly coexist. It's not coexisting if you're living with people you agree with. It's not coexisting. That's not the premise of it. If you look at that bumper sticker, I want to say it's symbols of all different types of religions and philosophies. And that idea of everyone from all these religions of Jewish or Islam or Christian or I want to say Buddhism, and just the plethora of religions and philosophies. If The only way they can coexist is if they acknowledge that that again, it's something where we're always going to disagree with things. It's just a matter again of conduct. I think that's the only thing that we can unite and fight and work together to resolve is like I said, certain excessively negative and hostile behavior. That it doesn't matter who's committing it. If it's negative, it's negative. If it's positive, it's positive. We need to stop looking at the source of the information of the act. We need to be condemning negative and hostile behavior, regardless of who it is. But as always, good luck and good night.